The Saiyans were never destroyed by Frieza. They were destroyed by what they chose to become long before he ever arrived. That is the part most people never think about. When Frieza's finger finally moved, the planet Vegeta was already a civilization built on its own collapse. Not because the Saiyans were weak. They were never weak. But because the most dangerous thing in the universe is a warrior race that forgot how to think. The Saiyans once had something rare, a natural instinct for survival that went beyond raw power. They could read battles the way most species cannot even read language. But somewhere along the way, they traded that instinct for service. They became Frieza's hands, his blade, his cleaners. And the moment they accepted that role, they stopped being a civilization and started being a weapon. A weapon does not survive when the hand that holds it decides to let go. That was the choice. Not one moment, not one king's order. A long, slow decision made across generations to stay strong by becoming someone else's army. The Saiyan elite saw the logic. Frieza had power that dwarfed anything on Vegeta. Fighting him directly was not courage, it was arithmetic that ended in annihilation. So King Vegeta made the calculation. Serve now, grow stronger, rebel later. That calculation has a fatal flaw. You cannot control the timeline of later. And Frieza, who had dismantled hundreds of civilizations, was not watching idly. He watched the Saiyan power ceiling rising. He watched the great ape transformations. He heard the legend of the Super Saiyan whispered from planet to planet like a warning. A ruler who built his empire on fear does not wait for a threat to mature. He eliminates it while it still believes it is safe. But here is the deeper wound. The Saiyans gave Frieza the perfect excuse to trust them right up until he killed them. They sent their warriors to his wars, they cleared his planets, they bowed. Every act of obedience was also an act of self-erasure. Prince Vegeta understood this on some level. Even as a child, the pride never fully bent. But pride without power, pride without position, pride without a plan, that is just suffering dressed up as dignity. Bardock is the most painful piece of this whole architecture. A low-class warrior who finally saw the truth, not through strategy or rank, but through a stolen vision of the future. He saw Frieza. He saw the ball of energy. He saw Vegeta burning. And when he tried to warn his own people, they looked at him like he was broken. That silence is the real tragedy. Not that no one could stop Frieza, that no one wanted to believe the moment had already come. The Saiyan culture was built around strength as proof of truth. If you were strong enough, you were right. If you were low class, your words were noise. Bardock had the most important information in Saiyan history and no social standing to make anyone listen. The power hierarchy that made the Saiyans dangerous also made them deaf at the moment they needed to hear most. Frieza did not beat the Saiyans in battle. There was no battle. He pushed a button from orbit while the most powerful warrior race in the galaxy was scattered across foreign planets, fighting his wars. They were not on Vegeta. They were not together. They were deployed. Even their greatest strength, combat aggression, had been redirected outwards so efficiently that when the real threat arrived, no one was home. A civilization that outsources its violence eventually loses the ability to direct it at the right target. The Super Saiyan legend should have been their North Star. Instead, it became a ghost story they told in whispers, something sacred and distant, and not yet real. The tragedy of the Saiyans is not that they were too weak. It is that they were powerful enough to survive almost anything, except the slow erosion of their own autonomy. Frieza gave them purpose, resources, targets, and a structure to plug into. And in accepting all of that, they quietly handed over the one thing no warrior should ever give away: the right to decide who the enemy is. When that right is gone, you are not a warrior race anymore. You are inventory. There is one moment that crystallizes everything. Bardock standing alone in Frieza's atmosphere, already knowing he has lost. Not because he was outmatched in that second, but because the entire architecture behind him had already failed. No backup, no fleet, no unified Saiyan response. Just one low-class soldier carrying the weight of a dead civilization's last coherent thought. That image is not heroic in the way Saiyan culture defined heroism. It is the opposite. It is what happens when a warrior society collapses inwards so completely that the only person left fighting the right enemy is the one nobody listened to. Bardock did not die because Frieza was too powerful to stop. He died because the Saiyans had already spent decades making sure no one could coordinate a real resistance. Think about how Frieza structured his army. He did not just use the Saiyans, he fragmented them. Elite units sent to distant sectors, low-class soldiers treated as expendable. The class divide on Vegeta was not just cultural vanity. It was a management tool Frieza understood better than the Saiyans themselves. As long as Nappa and Raditz and Bardock never saw themselves as part of the same body, they would never move as one. Divide the warriors. Give the elites enough pride to protect. Give the low class enough missions to stay away. By the time the Purge Order came, the Saiyans were already organized in a way that made collective survival nearly impossible. They were scattered, ranked, competing with each other, loyal to their own squad over their species. And King Vegeta, the one figure with the authority to pull them together, was already dead. He died trying to rescue his son from Frieza's ship, alone, without a plan that could actually work. With pride louder than strategy, that is the Saiyan condition at its most exposed. Raw courage, walking into a situation that required something the culture never fully developed: patience, the ability to absorb humiliation long enough to build something that could actually win. Vegeta the Prince would spend decades learning that lesson the hard way across battlefields far from home. But by then, there was no home to return to. The planet was gone. The bloodline was reduced to a handful of survivors, scattered like ash. And here's the part fans almost always flatten. People framed the Saiyan Extinction as Frieza's crime, and it was, but crimes need conditions. Frieza needed the Saiyans to be in a specific shape for his plan to work without resistance. He needed them proud enough to keep serving, divided enough to never unify, strong enough to be useful, and just self-deceived enough to believe the threat was still distant. The Saiyans met every single one of those conditions perfectly, not because they were foolish, because their entire value system pointed them in exactly that direction: honor through combat, status through power level, loyalty to rank before species. These were not weaknesses from the outside, they were strengths weaponized against their owners. Frieza did not break the Saiyans. He used them as they were designed to be used, and then discarded them before they could redesign themselves. That is the cold intelligence behind what happened. The Super Saiyan transformation, the thing Frieza feared, was still theoretical. Goku would not unlock it for years. Vegeta would chase it across humiliation after humiliation. It existed as a possibility, not a fact. And Frieza understood that possibilities have expiration dates. Strike before the legend becomes real. That is the only rule a paranoid empire needs. What makes this suffocating to sit with is that the Saiyans had everything required to survive: power, aggression, numbers, a reason to fight. What they lacked was the social architecture to aim all of it at the right moment and the right target simultaneously. A sword with no hand behind it does not matter how sharp the blade is. The blade was sharp, extraordinarily sharp. But the Saiyans, by the time Frieza moved, had handed over the hand. And that is not a story about being too weak. That is a story about a civilization that chose the shape of its own destruction, one calculated compromise at a time.